Welcome to Let's Plant Houses, the podcast where we talk about some incredible families' journeys, as well as some special people supporting them. I'm your host, Wendy Ernson. So whether you're a parent, a caregiver, or someone just looking to learn, you're in the right place. So today, I have Lauren Christilaw joining us on the show today, sharing her family story. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Wendy. I'm excited.
Me too. So Lauren, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, so my family consists of myself and my husband, and then we have our one son, Henry, who is just about to be 4.5 years old. He was born in the early days of COVID, so it's the three of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your son, Henry, so when did you think there might be just something a little bit different with Henry?
Yeah, so that initial, first 6 months was really a wild ride, bringing a child in May of 2020 into the world. So things were a little bit different from the beginning in regarding his initial care as a baby. It was just, things were a little bit more closed off.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that, because I don't know if I'm actually familiar with that.
Yeah, it was a real crazy time when COVID started. I was 31 weeks pregnant, so we just really isolated from everybody. And when we had Henry, our pediatrician was very conservative, and they said, listen, we don't know what this looks like in babies yet. It's way too early. You guys should really avoid seeing people really at all costs. So we did. We isolated for the first, 7 or 8 weeks. We only saw my husband's parents and my dad. We had some people that, did the window and, came and knocked on the window to see the baby, which was really difficult. He was the first grandson, or the first grandchild, I should say, on my husband's side of the family, and the second on mine. So we took a more conservative approach, and we tried to do things virtually that we could. Obviously, for his initial, well visits, we had to go in, but my husband and I were both trying to work remote as much as we can and just really minimize his contact with people. And then I really researched baby-led weaning, and
What is that?
So it's a way to incorporate food with your baby.
Okay.
Essentially, once they're old enough to sit up, and there's some guidelines, usually around 6 or 7 months. I did a bunch of research to essentially give him the best opportunity to eat food just like the rest of us.
Sure.
Food is a very important thing to me, and I say my husband, but mostly me. So it was important that he have, a good solid relationship with food, and baby-led weaning essentially introduces it in a positive context. So I was doing baby-led weaning with him, which really focuses on the oral function and oral mapping and jaw strength. And I just noticed as we, were progressing, 8, 10, 12 months, he was really struggling with feeding.
Okay.
I was able to tell the signs between like choking and coughing. So he wasn't having any issues in regards to, choking.
And swallowing.
But he was really struggling with chewing food and essentially the process of eating. So we had talked to the pediatrician a bit. And they were like, yeah, you should definitely do some OT, do some occupational therapy. Let's see what they say about this. I know how important early intervention is, for a lot of, health issues that children may have. So we immediately got on OT, and he did about 5 months, 6 months of OT.
So it was needed.
It was needed.
Okay.
Yep. They absolutely established he needed feeding therapy, and some different exercises to help with his oral mapping.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
It's amazing, because you're a first-time mom during a pandemic, and you still are able to figure out what your kid needs, and you were able to do that even with professionals. Because I often hear doctors oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
He or she will outgrow it. You're a first-time mom. You don't know. It's all fine. But, you advocated, and you got him something he needed immediately.
I did.
That's incredible.
Thank you. And I trusted my gut.
Yes.
And I knew that I wasn't as well-versed in the feeding area, but I knew what I was seeing in my son wasn't neurotypical.
Right.
And wasn't, what was supposed to be happening. And OT was great. We worked alongside them. They worked with a lot of different feeding exercises. We used different devices to help vibration to help stimulate his oral pathways and the oral mapping, which I think really helped. It really did help him for a while. And then we started creeping on a year and a half. And I'm like, okay, like I was aware of his speech and knowing how closely, the mouth controls speech.
Right.
So knowing all that, I was really aware of the lack of communication that he had.
He had few words.
He had very few words. He was using, he would use mama, dad. It wasn't always in the most appropriate context. And he would really rely on signing. We did a lot of baby sign language, which I was so thrilled that he was utilizing that.
Yeah.
But I also wanted that push for him to use words to communicate if possible. So that's when I had to advocate a second time with the pediatrician. This time they were a little bit more hesitant. And she said, well, the AAP is discussing changing some of these guidelines and pushing them from 18 months to 2 years old.
So at this time, he was 18 months.
He was 18 months. Yep.
Okay.
Maybe he was about 18 months.
Okay.
It was at our 18-month well visit that I brought it up.
But I don't want to lose 6 months.
And I'm like, I don't want to lose 6 months.
Yeah.
I know what losing 6 months can do.
Especially at that age.
And so they were reluctant, but I pushed for more referrals. I also knew that at 18 months, he was eligible for early on services. And early on services are incredibly critical. I'm so thankful to live in a state that has these services.
Yep.
But I knew what he was eligible for at 18 months. And so I pushed. And I said, well, I don't want to lose 6 months. I don't want to see where we're at when he's 2.
Right.
And at that point, he was in daycare. So I was starting to see some other things that were concerning to me in regards to some social aspects.
Okay.
So we pushed, and I got the early on referral. And at that point, we were in Royal Oak, and they were on it. They did the assessment relatively quickly. The turnaround time was awesome, and the folks
great.
that I was working with there were really good. And so they deemed that he was eligible for early on services. He was getting, I believe it was 2 hours a week, so 2 1-hour sessions. 2 days a week. And it was great. We had somebody coming into our home working on all of these skills with him.
That's amazing at that age.
It is. And
because the strides kids can make.
Yeah.
If you get, like you just said, with those early on services, it's incredible.
It's really incredible. And it gives you access to a lot of other services as well that I don't think a lot of people realize that, even though my son was getting speech services, we were concerned about some of his muscles and his abdomen and his legs. His core.
Yep.
So we had a PT there in the next week.
They're helping
to
him
evaluate.
with running or with taking steps.
All of those things.
Yep.
So early on was really just, it was truly a light for us. And, it offers that financial relief. We were paying out of pocket for OT, and we were ready to start paying out of pocket for speech therapy. But with early on, he had access to those services, obviously at no cost to us.
Right.
So that was a huge, game changer for us. Then he's, started to get older, and we moved from Royal Oak to Rochester.
Okay.
And so now we're in the Rochester area, and he's now, I guess, graduated into the ECSE program, which is Early Childhood Special Education.
Okay.
And that's geared for kids essentially 3 to 5. And it's offered through the school district, and it's essentially it mimics a public school environment. So it's getting them acclimated to the K-12 system with services before they're in kindergarten. So that's kind of where we're at right now with him. He's made incredible strides, and with his speech starting to come in, we've seen just his personality really shine. And
because he has less barriers.
He has less barriers.
Yeah.
And he feels that when he communicates, even if it takes a while for us to get to the bottom of it, we're able to make little steps versus us not being able to understand him at all and him just shutting down
Right.
and losing that desire to speak. So it's going good. We still have some other barriers, in that social aspect, but we're really happy with all the progress he's made in this ECSE program.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So does he have an official diagnosis at this time?
So he has a diagnosis of a significant speech delay.
Okay.
They have, some of his team has thrown around apraxia, but we haven't gone that route of diagnosis yet. The pediatrician also recommended that we get an autism diagnosis or pursue that, and we're still kind of on the fence. I think what we're really trying to decide is if this is something a little bit more sensory related, because he is starting to show signs of sensory processing disorder.
Sure.
So we're kind of just trying to flush out,
Do you want to just share
going to be
what
best.
sensory processing disorder is?
Yeah, so
or what you know about
the
it.
little bit that I know about sensory processing disorder is it functions, similar to autism. There can be a lot of overlap with autism and SPD, but the sensory processing disorder is different in that it's the way that the body interprets their environment around them in the sensory capacity. So some things that have really prompted us to look at this as a diagnosis is my son is very sensory seeking. So he is constantly moving his body. He is constantly wanting to jump or climb, or he started requesting us to swing him in a blanket. So he seeks out these opportunities for this specific type of input that makes his body feel a certain way.
Yep.
Which, we've said whatever his diagnosis ends up being, we'll find the correct services for him. We just want to make sure that we're utilizing our time efficiently and we're getting to the bottom of the correct diagnosis for him.
Right, because if you're spending all this time in therapies, you want to make sure you're going in the right direction.
Yes.
And you don't want to get a diagnosis just for the sake of getting a diagnosis. And it's a lot. That testing can be a lot. So it's like you want to make sure that, okay, if we do this, it's because we want to get to this next place.
Yep.
Because we know that's what he needs.
And I'm familiar, my background, I worked in ABA therapy for about 4 years.
So that probably helped you to
understand,
to see these
discriminate.
things ahead of time. I got you.
Yeah, but I come from the ABA world that I came from was you sought that diagnosis because that was the key to services.
And there's truth to that, but you have to make sure you want those services.
Exactly.
Right? So you have to make sure that that is, in fact, what he needs is ABA or it is OT or whatever the thing is.
Exactly. And from the flip side, I don't want to get him into services that aren't the most beneficial from him and potentially take that time away from somebody else who could be utilizing those services. So we're still, deciding. This is really going to be a very interesting school year for him because the class that he's in right now is a blended class. So it is essentially supposed to be him, a mix of children with IEPs and children without IEPs to essentially provide this integrated environment. And I think this is where we're really going to see what kind of supports he might need.
Right.
That's where the bulk of his struggles have started to become apparent, is in that social category.
Okay.
So we're going to kind of play it by ear. And, I keep having the conversations with his team. I think that's the important thing to remember, is that even if you're in the middle or this gray area of a diagnosis or services, just to keep communicating with the team and keep having those conversations, because if at any point they say to me like, hey, we're really starting to see XYZ, then I can flip and we can always call the doctor.
That's right.
And start pursuing that, option. I know it won't happen overnight, but by being in communication with his team consistently, we're up to date on what his needs and current needs are.
Well, because they spend some time, depending on how much time he is in school, they might spend more hours of waking hours with him than you.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So, between the way the schedules operate, so absolutely having communication. And then if there are things that if he's making progress in school and there's things that you could do at home,
Exactly.
you can share that.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So have you been thinking at all about like plans for the future, or this is your plan? Your plan is like what's happening right now?
Yeah. But I'm always thinking about the future, if I'm being honest. And I'm sure other, families that have had to advocate for a loved one, they know that. I'm always thinking about the future, and I'm always thinking about what those next transitions look like. With the balance of it being a healthy thought process and a productive thought process, but I am always thinking, and I'm thinking of what's next. So our biggest debate right now is if he goes to kindergarten next year.
Yeah.
He'll be 5 in May. So age-wise, he could be going into kindergarten a year from now. And when I think about that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, we're not ready for that.
Right.
We're not ready for that transition.
But a year's a long time.
A year is a long time.
Especially if he's in the environment you think and being supported in the right way.
A lot can
Who's to
change
say?
in a
Yeah,
year.
who's to say?
Exactly. So that's why I've really thought of multiple aspects.
You got all the scenarios,
I got
right?
all the scenarios played out. But the most important thing is that I've communicated those things to the school.
Yeah.
And those things are documented in his IEP. We documented that, parental concerns are him being ready for kindergarten. So that way we can remove the emotion out of it, and we can look at, I don't want to say look at the data and
No,
make my
you're-
son a statistic.
But no, you're absolutely right. Data drives results.
Yeah.
Especially in special education.
Yeah.
That yes, you're absolutely right.
And I want to make sure that we're looking at that data of how he's performing and
What's his baseline and where does he need to be?
and where does he need to be
Yeah.
to be successful with his peers, not just be successful in a gen ed setting, but have a fulfilling academic experience with his peers. That's important. That's very important to us, which, to be honest, we lean towards holding him back another year and having him start kindergarten when he's 6.
Yep.
I know that that's something that historically has been done. And I know that there is some data potentially showing that boys can benefit from that extra year.
There's precedent.
So we're totally on board with doing that if that's what's best for him. But I think it's just really preparing for the next transition that I found has been very helpful. When we got the early on referral, I knew this was going to be a long-term thing. I knew it wasn't going to be like, oh, we'll be with early on for 3 or 6 months and then we're done. Like I knew this was going to be a marathon.
Sure.
So I started prepping myself and saying like, okay, what are the phases he's going to go through?
Right.
He's going to go through early on. He'll go through ECSE, and then we start his K-12 experience and just breaking that down and looking at what each of those transitions looks like has really helped me and my husband as first-time parents doing this
Right.
on our own to know what to anticipate and what to expect. I've just found that being prepared or feeling like I'm as prepared as I can be helps us to make the best decisions for Henry.
So speaking of like these types of transitions and how to like measure and monitor, are you guys breaking, because I know for us, the IEPs would always be a year out.
Yeah.
Right? So then you're not actually looking at those results till a full year later. Are you guys breaking those chunks into smaller increments to really understand if you're getting where you need to go so you can make those good decisions when the time comes?
Yeah. So how it's worked out is when Henry started. So with early on, we worked with the therapist, 2 hours a week. So I was constantly talking to her
Sure.
about his goals. So in the early on phase, it wasn't as important as when he went to ECSE.
Right.
Once he hit that ECSE, I was like, okay, we're a lot more hands off now as parents.
And also when you hit K through 12,
It gets even more.
Yeah.
It gets even more hands off.
Yeah.
So I wanted to establish early on that this was going to be continuing conversations. So thankfully, in his first ECSC class, we had a phenomenal experience, and he started that in the middle of a school year. So he did half a school year and then one entire school year in the same class with the same teacher. And
Okay.
so she was phenomenal about communicating. I would ask her regularly how he was doing. At 6 months, he actually met his goals on the initial IEP. So we were able to have another IEP in 6 months.
Yeah.
So we really didn't go a full year. We only
Right.
went that 6 months. And I think time has been on our side. because then we had to get, just naturally, we've had to get him ready for the next step, and that IEP has always come up. I haven't had to formally request the IEP, so we've done his initial. When he moved through and progressed through those goals, then we had his other IEP, which was 6 months out. And then we planned for his next year, which that also happened to be in a 6-month increment. So
because of the timing, the IEPs become more of a formality for you
Yeah.
because you have been making these transitions consistently.
yeah,
Got it.
and I continue to talk with the school, and I
Sure.
continue, I'm very vocal in his IEP. I'm adding, obviously discussing with the school, but I'm adding goals to his IEP.
Sure, as you should.
Things that are important to us.
How many other therapists are you seeing? How
Exactly.
many? What are you seeing at home?
Yep.
Like what experiences is he having outside
Yeah.
of school? They need to, I'm sure it sounds like they're open to it, but yeah, absolutely, you're going to have something to contribute.
Exactly. So I'm we're very active, and I mean, I say we, my husband, he trusts my judgment. He's just kind of along for the ride. But yeah, we communicate with them, and I also I try to research the process, and I try to understand what they mean when they say a goal needs to be met by, observation or verbal
60% of the time.
Exactly.
Or whatever the figure is,
And I've said to them, I would prefer that, when his goals are met, or when the team believes he is meeting his goals, that these are observed, that it's not just written observation. I want them to be able to see what he's done and know that he actually has met this goal.
Okay.
And that we are ready to move on to the next step. I'm just very big on him not falling through the cracks, as I know that can happen in public schools with just everything that is public education. I'm very adamant that he doesn't fall through the cracks, and he gets the supports and services that he needs to be as successful as he can.
He's entitled to.
And that he's entitled to with a free and appropriate education. In the most, I keep saying in the most least restrictive environment, but that's not right. In the least
I
restrictive.
know exactly what you mean, yes. Because you want it to mimic what real world's going to be like for them one day. So you want the least restrictive environment as possible.
Yep.
But if they need support, then they should have support.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
that makes tons of sense. So I guess with your experience and knowledge acquired so far on this journey with Henry and your husband, how are you sharing what you've learned with others?
Oh, I love sharing with others.
Well, tell me more about it.
I love doing that. So I, to be transparent, I have worked in this space before. So I have worked for an advocacy organization before. So I was always able to utilize my platform with our supporters. But I've really leaned into my communities that I have between, our friends and the people that live in our neighborhood, exposing them to a child that is different and that learns different, and having the conversations with parents. Like, you can come up and talk to him. It's okay. You can ask questions. Everybody's different, and just really embracing these differences. But I also do it on the flip side as well, because I'm very big on education, and I'm very fortunate in the line of work that I do. I get to talk with people every day. I get to talk to, many different folks from many backgrounds with lots of shared experience. And I'm always looking to connect people. I just did it the other day. A girl that I went to school with has a son with autism, and she lives in Lapeer County, and she is really struggling. And I'm like, I know somebody in Lapeer County who has children with special needs that she would love to chat with you about her journey and the different things that she did. So I'm always thinking of, networking other people and connecting other people. Like I said, I do it in my day job as well. So it's just a natural platform for me to be able to talk about something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I have no problem saying I have no idea about that, but you can contact the ARC. You can contact Michigan Alliance for Families. You can contact Autism Alliance of Michigan. You can contact all these folks.
Yeah, because, and this is why you would contact them.
And this is why you can. So sometimes it's not, you don't have to know everything. You just need to know how to connect people and where to find the information.
That's incredible. Love that.
Yeah, it's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy connecting other people.
I know that listeners can't see this, but I can see this completely on your face, Lauren, and I love it. I love that it seems like it truly brings you joy to help others, and that's amazing. It's amazing that you share that because you don't have to either, but you choose to.
And too, it's, looking at it from, that planning. These children are all going to get older.
That's right.
These children are going to get older. They're going to turn into adults that have special needs. They're going to age. And so as we think about what is a meaningful life for them, we also have to think about what supports are going to be needed for these folks as they age,
right,
and what kind of, facilities and caregivers. And that's not even getting into, the legal realm of protecting some of these vulnerable folks. So that's why I think the education piece is so important, because the more we're talking about it, the more meaningful conversations we're going to have to advance, this population that we support.
Absolutely. And just to add to what you just said, education is the gateway to employment. Mm-hmm. And employment prevents people from being in poverty. Yeah. And there are so many people with disabilities that are in poverty because of the lack of support that they're given, and then there's this whole balance between the benefits they get from the federal government and how much they can work. And we're not gonna get into all that today. That's a whole nother topic. But I agree with you that focusing on education so they can get the strongest foundation that is possible before because ultimately you're hoping they'll need less support. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think that you are an incredible advocate for your son, and it's so important, the work that you're doing for him and for other families. So I guess the last thing I will ask you, because I know we're almost out of time, and this has been amazing, but for families new on the journey, what is one piece of advice you might give them?
Prepare for the transitions, and research and educate yourself appropriately, and don't be afraid to, I know that's like 4 things I just said, but they're all connected. Under the umbrella of researching things, don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to reach out to somebody and say, hey, I know, you talk about this. Can I ask you some questions? We're really stuck. I think that's what is going to help advance these individuals that we support, is that networking and that communicating and just really getting connected, because I'm still learning a lot on this journey, and I'm so thankful for the people that have done it before me to give the advice. So just prepare for the transitions and ask questions. That would be the biggest pieces of advice. So
well, thank you for that. Yeah, no, that's all good. 2 is good. It's a great number. Well, thank you again so much for coming on the show, sharing your story. I know that it's going to inspire others, so I really appreciate it. And for those of you listening in, thank you for joining us. I also hope you will consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this podcast with others who may find it meaningful. Please join us next time on Let's Plant Houses. Take care.